everyone to this webinar on behalf of We Speak Out and Equality Now. It's going to focus on the issue of female genital mutilation slash cutting in South Asia, and particularly on voices from communities. My name is Divya Srinivasan. I work as the global lead of the Ending Harmful Practices program in Equality Now, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. I'm just really excited for this conversation because I think we have some amazing panelists here, and we've been able to get like really good representation from across South Asia. And yeah, just really looking forward to this conversation. So as many of you might know, the issue of FGMC is a critical issue in the Asian region. The latest data from UNICEF from 2023 shows that there are 80 million women and girls in Asia who are affected by FGMC, of which 70 million are in Southeast Asia. So this is one of the few cases where we have less affected population in South Asia, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be a really critical issue that we're looking at within the South Asian region as well. Of the South Asian countries, only the Maldives actually has nationally representative data on the practice. The DHS survey shows that 13% of women and girls aged 15 to 49 in the Maldives have undergone FGMC. And in the other countries, though we don't have sort of the national data, we do know that this is a practice that's happening. In India, for example, groups like We Speak Out and Sahio have done research studies which have shown that within the Bora community, 75% of girls have been subjected to FGMC. And we also know that there are other communities like the Sunni community in Kerala where it's happening. In Sri Lanka, there's been, again, a few research studies, including by the Family Planning Association, which shows that FGMC is happening amongst the Moor, Malay, and Bora communities. And in Pakistan, I think it's probably the country with the least research, but again, we have some evidence there, particularly from the Bora community and from stories of survivors. So on today's webinar, we really hope to go more into the different ways that FGMC is practiced across these 4 countries. We have representatives on our panel from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives, as well as South Asian diaspora from the US and the UK, from these communities. So we're really excited to hear from them, to learn from what's happened in the last, say, 10 years or so, when there's been like huge strides made by the movement in the region to ensure that, FGMC is put on the map and that it's actually started to be addressed and well known within the community, but also to hear, what the challenges are and what the difficulties are in really advocating for this issue, both at the community level and with the government. So please, while we're talking, please introduce yourself in the chat box and tell us where you're from, because we're excited to keep the conversation going, and we hope this will be a start of really sort of a more long-term sort of knowledge sharing and learning of experiences amongst the South Asian community, because I think we all have a lot to learn from each other and how we're addressing this issue within our own countries. So just to, I'll introduce each of the panelists, as and when I'm asking the question, because I think that might be easier for us to do. So first, maybe Masuma, if I can start off with you. So Masuma is the lead of We Speak Out India. She's been a really critical voice in raising the issue of FGMC, both within the Bora community and more generally in India globally. And Masuma, if I can start with you, could you share with us a little bit on what have been the key moments of the work around FGMC in India, why they were important, and what some of the challenges have been?
Sure. Thank you so much, Divya. And I think this is a great platform for voices from South Asia to really emerge and shine a light on the work we are doing. So in 2015, I spoke for the very first time in public about the fact that I had been subject to FGM as a child. It was a terrifying moment for me. I was engulfed with a feeling of shame, anger, helplessness. But this act of communication was actually a healing for me also. It was cathartic. And on that day, I began a journey. I was soon joined by many other survivors and telling our stories, exploring our vulnerabilities did not make us weak, really. In fact, it strengthened us. The same year, we started the platform called We Speak Out uh, for all survivors. And all we did for the first few months was just talk about the violence done to our bodies in childhood. Just a quick note, in the Bora community, which I belong to, it happens at the age of between 6 and 7. Typically, the kind of practice is 1 or 5, but there are no boundaries as such. It can go beyond 1 also. And so today we work with women from the community in terms of creating awareness, and we work on legal and policy levels as well to end FGM. Although there has been no formulaic methodology that we have used to eliminate FGM and in our work, a large part of our work is guided by our own experiences of loss and pain and is rooted in our community and our culture. We have also taken in the experience and strategies of the existing networks and global movements against the practice. Like we read about what was happening in Africa. I was lucky enough to attend several conferences, meet survivors and activists from the African continent, and it was very, very inspirational. It's almost a decade long journey now, and I think the first milestone that we was where we helped uncover a deeply hidden secret and an invisible practice. We found our voices and we got organized to work on the issue. When we started our work on the ground, it was really not easy because we were not operating in a rural area. We were working in cities. All of us were well city bred, educated, professional women, economically independent, and highly articulate. But yet, finding our voice on this issue was never easy. While a handful of us spoke openly, the vast many of women who supported our ideas shied from any kind of public viewing. They were anonymous. We had to tread very, very slowly and very cautiously. We soon realized that there was this insidious practice of social boycott which loomed large in the community, and it started affecting our work in numerous ways. So, one is there is a fear that you cannot challenge, you cannot question, you cannot ask for any change in the community. And if you do so, you're threatened with social boycott, and then it's implemented also. And social boycott really means you're cut off from your community, you're cut off from your family, you cannot speak to anybody. Economically, socially, you are a pariah. And it really is a scary, scary thought. Um, but at the same time, we were together, we were really, very high spirits in those days. And we got a lot of support from the media. There were a lot of CSOs in our country which were supporting us. Even global organizations came forward to support us. And what was happening is our voices were getting amplified at that time. And simultaneously, while this was happening, there were efforts from sections of the community, who were attacking us. And specifically, around the same time, another organization was born, which is called DBWRF, which is Dawoodi Bohra Women for Religious Freedom. And this took shape, and their primary job was to counter our work and our narratives. And they outright rejected our experiences and often accused us of being paid hacks of the West. We were branded as outsiders, and in subtle and not so subtle ways, activist girls were pressurized and their families tried to keep them in line. And of course, the threat of social boycott was all the time used. In the course of our work, we always tried to balance tradition with modernity. As survivors, and our work as activists basically was constantly learning how to balance, activism, putting this whole issue forward. At the same time, we have respect for our culture, tradition, and religion. But we are still often trapped in this ongoing debate which pits human rights against local harmful traditional practices. And any attempt to question or challenge a harmful tradition or practice is viewed as a threat to culture, religion as a whole. And the easiest and the most, harmful insults against us have been that we are loose women, we talk about sex, sexuality, sexual parts, we are anti-religion, we are anti-culture, we are outsiders, and we are on the fringe. But let us be clear, by undertaking actions and campaigns against FGM, none of us denounced religion or our culture. Yet our detractors made us out to be anti-religion, and the religious fundamentalist leaders often threatened us with, various ways in which they could silence us. And so the question really I want this house to really look at is, do we not have the right to freedom of religion as individual women? And is it wrong to demand that women's rights take priority over intolerant, harmful practices? The bottom line is the campaign against FGM is not about being influenced by the West, nor is it about belittling our community, our culture, our traditions. Rather, it stems from the outrage over our bodily integrity being damaged and from our fervent, desire to protect girls from such humiliation and harm. So it's not about defining religion. In 2018, we published the very first qualitative study where we had real life accounts of over 93 respondents, women, girls, cutters as well, of how the practices performed on them and the implications it has had on their bodies and mind. It was path-breaking, and it gave us the critical evidence to go and meet the government and ask them to respond. It's been 7 years down the line, and the government of India has refused to acknowledge the presence or prevalence of FGM in India. And being asked on several occasions, like in the Supreme Court, it was asked a question, in the Parliament, the government has been asked questions. At every platform, the government has said there is no national estimate or data of FGM on India. The NCRB, which is the National Crime Record Bureau, has no data on FGM. So this is a classic catch-22 we are faced with. How will this data come unless the government undertakes a census or a study for it? Data remains our biggest challenge to date. So there is enough anecdotal evidence actually, not only within the Bora community, but now we know about the prevalence of FGM in the Sunni Muslim community in Kerala. So there are small studies which have been undertaken by individuals with minimal funding, but who is really listening to us? Which also brings us to the next challenge, which is the lack of funds. Not only is there a lack of funding for innovative, creative ideas from women who want to make a difference, but also our systems are too difficult. For instance, registering an organization, getting an FCRA certificate, basically to get funding from outside into India is next to impossible. We all know that the current regime in India is doing its best to ensure that work like ours does not get funded. Then in 2019, we also published a legal study which looked at our laws, which studied international laws, FGM definitions, procedures within the justice system. We are also part of a public interest litigation, which is in the Supreme Court of India on this issue. It's been 5 long years and we are stuck. The matter is not moving forward, it's pending. Today, we are close to creating a draft law to end FGM legally in India. However, the challenges we face here are also tremendous. While we want a law which will be a deterrent, we do not want to give power to a majoritarian state police, to attack minorities, not one more weapon in their armory. We want mothers to stop getting their girls cut. But is criminalizing mothers who take their child for cutting sometimes out of sheer ignorance or societal pressures the only option that we have? These are questions which need answer, and they're really not easy questions to answer. Also, need to factor in the effects such laws have in the countries which they already exist. For instance, today we just saw how Gambia, there was a concerted move in the parliament to reverse back the law which exists in that country. And so it's not just about laws. We understand it's about policy. It's about intersectoral support systems, education, awareness. And the real challenge, of course, is the attitudes of practicing communities. Bottom line is it's not an easy path, but we do have the courage to do whatever it takes to eliminate FGM. So that's I think what we are up for. And before I end, I We Speak Out as part of its outreach made a small film this year, um, which really encapsulates the dilemma of a common, ordinary woman and man, a young couple, and of how to deal with this whole question of an advanced way of FGM. We can quickly watch this film before we move on, if that's okay, Divya.
Thank you so much, Masuma. I think we're a bit already behind schedule, so we're gonna try and play the film at the end. Once we
Okay.
before wrapping up the webinar, but also please put the link in the chat for in case people want to watch it later. But yeah, thank you so much, Masuma. I think you raised a lot of really, really important points, and I think one of the things that's sticking with me is about the right to freedom of religion and why we always use it to defend harmful practices. But what about our right as women to our own religion and how we define it? I think sort of that's a really good segue also to move to hear from Ermiza. Ermiza Tegal is a human rights lawyer and advocate from Sri Lanka who has a specialization on working on issues of gender and gender-based violence. And she is also one of the researchers of one of the first studies on FGMC to be conducted in Sri Lanka. So, Ermiza, could you tell us a little bit of the findings of your study and how it should concern us, and also as a lawyer, maybe to hear some reflections in terms of the issues which Masuma has raised that we're struggling with in India when it comes to whether to pass a law on FGM or not, and how that looks like in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. It's nice to be speaking with all these interesting and excellent speakers. And it's also really important that we are all part of these spaces that are, shedding more light on this issue. So thank you for the invitation. So in Sri Lanka, when we first started looking into the issue, it's because that there was really no information. So the WHO reported a 0 score for female genital mutilation in Sri Lanka in its gender-based violence report in 2008, right? So as far as Sri Lanka was concerned, FGM was not happening here. Then in 2016, there were a few women's voices that started talking about their own personal experiences with FGM. And that got some media publicity, and there was advocacy that began in terms of engaging with government agencies like the Human Rights Commission, the Women's Caucus in Parliament, and various state bodies to try and raise this issue of concern. But also I noticed very much where it was really difficult for women talking about it to come forward. So there were these banners, these collectives, these groups, but very difficult to really show face and be public with the demands that were being made, because there was so much scrutiny, there was so much backlash that women would face. So my colleague Zainab Ibrahim and myself then embarked on a study to particularly understand what the landscape was. There was no study, and I think as was said by Masuma earlier, it was basically anecdotal information that was available. In 2019, we come out with our report, which is the first report on the practice of FGM in Sri Lanka, and it's basically a few 20 odd interviews that we did, 26 interviews, where we realized that it was women themselves reported it as a fairly prevalent practice. It really was an exercise to understand as opposed to look at prevalence of the practice. What we learned in our research study was that there was a diversity of Muslim communities, which we knew, but that diversity also reflected the diversity of the practice. So, for example, within the Bora community, it's highly prevalent. There's a strong sense of mandatoriness, and the Bora community in Sri Lanka is fairly small, right? And they were reporting the most in terms of also harm caused and impact even later in life in marital relations, in sexual experience, because the description was of a type 1 female genital mutilation, which is cutting off external parts of genitalia, right? But the majority of the Muslim community identifying as Sunni, but also breaking up into then different groupings and identity groupings, reported type 4, which was a nick, where the girl child was an infant, 1 month, few months in, and as a practice, there was a pinprick or a blade held, and there was really no ability to then understand whether there was scarring, whether there was any difference. It was hard to see. It was also something that you don't remember, whereas in the Bora community, when this is done to the girl child at the age of 7, there are vivid memories of that experience. So we had this different reporting. So it was mothers then from the Moor community, Malay communities telling us that, yes, we do this because they remember it being done to their girl children, whereas they hardly remembered it being done to themselves. And even within that, we noticed the Mayman community or the Tawheed communities were telling us that they don't advocate the practice. That's part of their religious belief not to advocate it. And the women who then identified, some of them, right? I'm not saying this more generally, but some of them who identified as Jamaat-e-Islam said this is mandatory in the group that we identify with. So I think that diversity was really important to understand, even when we tackle and try to respond to this issue. We also notice as we talk to these women, and in these spaces where we're sitting and talking about this issue, there was also diversity of believed justifications for the practice. It ranged from, it is in our religion to do this. Actually, if we do this, it enhances and establishes our Muslim identity. It is tradition, custom, my mother did it, my grandmother, aunt did it, so I'm doing it. It is necessary to control women's desires so that they're better wives. Some thought there is some medical benefit, I don't know what it is, but there is a medical benefit to it. Some thought it actually improves the male partner's interest in the marriage, so therefore we are told to do it. So, and another one said it improves the appearance of female genitalia. Another person would have said women's sexual experience actually improve as a result of the practice. So this range of diverse justifications, which didn't really have that the underpinnings, scientific underpinnings, was also the reasons why the practice was perpetuated. And that was really important for us to understand. We also very much, I think my colleague and myself were very aware and spoke to women about the context in which this Muslim communities also live in Sri Lanka. So as an oppressed minority, as a discriminated minority with a history of riots against Muslim communities, demonizing language used against the Muslim communities, a language of terrorism, a language of threat to national security. Women also were the bearers of that burden, right? And the other aspect that we really learned through the conversations is that these women, for the first time they were talking about it. They were like, why are you coming to talk about FGM with us? Nobody tries to talk to us about this. And then they spoke to us about other things like domestic violence, for example. They spoke to us about contraception, about reproductive health. And we realized there was no space to have these conversations within their communities or service providers, because they did also feel discriminated when they access services. So there was a strong need to then recommend non-judgmental services being provided on these issues. So I think that kind of encapsulates what we took away as a learning. And we really didn't want it to be a report that says this is a prevalent practice and it should be battled in a particular way, but we wanted to understand women's perceptions, their ideas, their desires, their interests in this practice, because they were the ones protecting the practice. They were the ones who also, the cutters, they were the ones who took their children to the practice. And then we also learned that there were doctors, medical professionals who also engaged in the practice. So coming to the second part of your question, as a lawyer, you asked what would be those pathways, right, to respond. And one would think, as a lawyer myself, I would just naturally look at criminalizing, but that is not where we landed with this issue. As part of the advocacy that affected women engaged in Sri Lanka, the Ministry of Health issued a circular informing state doctors not to engage in the practice. So state hospitals in Sri Lanka, it's a public health service. So they were told. So there was some hearing of this grievance. The medical circular that went out said, don't engage in this practice. There were women who posted those circulars to the doctors that they knew who engaged in those practices to inform them that this is not safe. But there was a discussion about introducing language around criminal law. We looked at the criminal law and we saw that already causing hurt, cruelty to children was part of the law. And we also know how the law is implemented in Sri Lanka, right? So it's a very complex demand when you talk about trying to criminalize this practice. Again, the criminalization will focus on women themselves, the women who cut, the women who take their children to this ritual. And it was really hard to imagine how this criminalizing would target women in a landscape where women as minorities were also battling the issue of protecting their communities or requiring to conform to particular community ideals, or even conform to a more nationally acceptable Muslim person, right? And then also the same person was being attacked as a minority for backwardness in this context. So we really did promote in our recommendations greater awareness raising, engagement with individuals on the topic and learning, because we did see that spark from even within the few women that we spoke to, that once there is knowledge and understanding and a sense of autonomy over your own body, there is resistance also. There were women who said, I don't want to do this for my daughter. I don't think, I feel like something is wrong. I'd like to learn more information about this. We thought it was very important to talk about comprehensive sexual and reproductive health, even starting from school, right? And creating those spaces openly with service providers, whether it's the Family Planning Association or other state services like the Family Health Bureau, the midwives, for them to be familiar with it. So one of the things that we also did was we engage those agencies and medical professionals in trying to understand this practice, and when women come to them with questions, that they have the answers to non-judgmentally engage in those conversations. So that is really where we landed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think maybe one thing both you and Masuma had pointed out is the importance of data and understanding the practice and seeing how it looks like for communities. So maybe coming to Atu, actually, firstly to introduce her. So Aisha is the Vice President of Hope for Women Maldives, and has been working on issues relating to violence against women in the Maldives for over 20 years, and also has worked as a police officer in the past. So I think she's going to bring an interesting perspective to our conversation. So Atu, I guess with Maldives being the only country in the region which actually has official data on FGMC, what have been the challenges for you in terms of getting that data, but also once you have it, in moving towards implementation and ensuring that it actually leads to work towards ending FGMC in the country, and how have you got around those challenges?
Thank you, Divya, and hi everyone. Yes, you're absolutely right. Maldives stands out in the South Asia region as one of the few countries with official data. But however, despite having that data, there are significant challenges associated with it, particularly in terms of comprehensiveness and the accuracy and actionable insights to it. The underreporting and social stigma is one of the biggest challenges that we have. FGMC is a highly sensitive issue intervened with cultural and religious beliefs in the Maldives, as both Masuma and Armiza had pointed out as well, which leads to significant underreporting. And families and communities they are very reluctant to discuss or admit to practicing FGMC due to fear of like legal consequences or shame and the social stigma that surrounds it. And many women and girls who have undergone FGMC may not come forward due to fear of retribution or societal judgment, it further contributing to the gap in that data. And the last official data collection on FGMC in the Maldives was part of the Maldives Demographic and Health Survey. This was in back in 2016, 2017, but this data is not updated regularly. So without continuous monitoring, it's difficult to track the trends or understand the current prevalence and the changes in practices as well. And the existing data may not capture all aspects of the practice, such as the age at which girls are cut, or the types of procedures used, or even the specific like regions where it is more prevalent. Because as you all know, the Maldives scattered island geography makes it hard to conduct nationwide surveys and outreach as well. Many island communities are isolated and lack regular access to central authorities or even healthcare facilities. That could help with the data collection process, but it's difficult because of that. Another challenge is the absence of specific legislation, or rather, the lack of legal enforcement. Although there are laws in place to protect children and prevent harmful practices, there is no specific legislation in the Maldives that explicitly bans FGMC. This legal ambiguity makes it difficult to collect precise data, as people may not feel that reporting FGMC will lead to significant legal consequences. Um, Even if legislation were in place, uh, enforcement of such laws in small, dispersed island communities is a logistical dilemma, because this adds to the difficulty of gathering reliable data from the remote regions. Another important challenge is that FGMC is often justified through religious interpretations, as both the speakers ahead of me had mentioned as well, by some conservative sections of the society. I mean, this leads to resistance, not only in addressing the practice, but also in openly discussing it, making that data collection difficult in some particular areas of the country. Moving on to your second question, which is like the best ways to address and work around these challenges. I think number of things that we have been able to do uh, is increase public awareness and education on it. Campaigns have focused on the health risks and rights violations of FGMC and how it should be expanded. Um, Targeting parents, caregivers, health workers, and teachers can reduce, and it has reduced that secrecy around the practice, and it encourages open reporting. Um, we've worked with religious scholars and community leaders, and we found that it's very crucial to changing perceptions of FGMC and encouraging open dialogue by involving influential figures who are respected in that specific community. Advocacy campaigns can address that misconceptions about the religious and cultural necessity of the practice, and it has also helped create an environment where people feel more comfortable discussing FGMC, making data collection, I think, easier in the future. um, we've also tried to conduct in various ways uh, regular and comprehensive surveys here and there. The Maldives could benefit from conducting regular large scale. Now, something that we've been trying to do has been to promote a large scale survey somehow, along with government institutions, to maintain updated data, because I feel after the DHS we haven't been able to get proper data done, like a survey done, and be able to publish it. So engaging with organizations like the UN UNFPA or UNICEF, which have experience in such surveys, could ensure that these surveys are robust and more reliable. Um, we've we also encourage the healthcare workers to report instances of FGMC that they encounter during routine checkups and treatments. Uh, and we've tried doing training for healthcare workers on how to identify FGMC and empowering them to refer victims for support services. Will like to increase that. It will not only just like help in data collection, but also in providing care for survivors. The scattered geography of the Maldives presents logistical challenges for data collection, but mobile health applications and like remote data collection platforms can be used, I think, to gather data from the far-flung islands, particularly when face-to-face surveys are not very feasible. So I hope that covers the bit of the kind of challenges that we have been facing through the years and ways that we have tried to address and work with them.
Yes, definitely. Thanks so much, Atu. And I think it's quite heartening to hear about the range of work that you've already started implementing in the Maldives in terms of, yeah, both engaging with community and religious leaders, but also training of service providers. I think we probably haven't done that as much in some of the other South Asian countries. So it's good to hear that. And I would now like to invite Alina Halai from Pakistan. Alina is a communication strategist and she's from the Bora community. So she's been working on advocating around the issue of FGMC. Alina, I think Athu also spoke a little bit about how important it is to get influential voices from within the community as part of the advocacy. Could you tell us a little bit about what have been the community engagements and advocacy initiatives so far, both in Pakistan and with Pakistani diaspora communities in other countries? And also, I think maybe if you can tell us or reflect on why it's so that there's not been as strong and visible a movement or a community-led movement towards addressing FGMC in Pakistan as compared to some of the other South Asian countries.
Hi everyone, this is Alina. So I actually would like to answer your questions the other way around. Like everyone said, there is so much, there's so many data points that you could tap into. But the problem often is that there is a religious barrier that you have to cross. And when we talk about Pakistan, especially in the Bora community, one of the biggest challenges about interventions or even just speaking about it is the religious impact or the community driven impact of that. For me personally, just to give some context as to why this is a thing, is that I first realized what had happened, how it works, everything is because me and my friends collected and we would hang out. And, one fine day we kind of had these conversations about, oh, did this happen to you? And we were all under the guise of, we were told this is an infection and you had to kind of go and get it fixed, and et cetera, et cetera. It's only when we were slightly older at a point in our lives where we were getting exposed to other things, even something as simple as A-level studies books where they would mention like communities do these practices and people would ask. And so, the curiosity is what pushed at least me to kind of understand what was happening, and then ask my mom and then ask other people and then so on and so forth. So building that connection was interesting because it felt like almost like someone had done something to me and I was hurt by it and I was so angry that it was done to me. But at the same time, it was a way for me to understand the practice and also understand that there is such an aura of secrecy around it, because nobody could really tell me why it is that is being done, right? And as everyone has mentioned before, there is a numerous amount of reasons that are being given, from sexual curbing to sexual enhancement to cleanliness or hygiene, and there none of them made a lot of sense, because when you think about it scientifically, it's they don't they, there's no kind of linear sort of proof that suggests any of these ideas are true. And so again, when I was going to go talk about this in Pakistan, or when I wanted to really address it and talk about it, there was very small, limited spaces where I could. Now, I had the privilege of mindset with my friends and family such that I was able to have these conversations. But beyond that point, even my mom or so and so forth would tell me, okay, you're talking about it, but you don't need to talk about it to a point where it impacts you and our family and so on and so forth. So that is such an important fact to remember when we talk about FGM and interventions or even mitigation, where yes, mitigation is the ideal case, output or the solution. However, there's a bigger step that I've now understood that needs to be taken, which is awareness and understanding. Because yes, over time, with the help of the internet and people talking about it and movements like SAIO and We Speak Out, there has been movement towards understanding the practice and potentially even shunning it. But the religious influence that comes with even something as like in the Bora community in itself is immense. People would not want to, and something that took me very long to understand was that ideology is probably one of the hardest things to undo and kind of work around. And irrespective of whether I agree or I don't, in the Bora community, it is all based on ideology and belief and faith and so on and so forth. So when you really believe these things, even if it's coming from the top or the bottom, right? There's a genuine true belief. Now, working your way back out and understanding the harm caused, there are interventions that I suppose feel like, okay, I would rather be making, because yes, mitigation might just be pushing my limits a little too far for the time being, because for me, safety is a bigger problem than mitigation currently. Because when I'm stuck with when I'm stuck in a place where there's somewhat awareness, somewhat ability to speak about it, really kind of address it, mitigation is not a possibility for me. And so, as much as I would like it to be, it's not. And I think about it in the community level, where it's almost tradition to go to these women who are allowed by religious leaders, especially this is all from the Bora community, right? There's women who are given permission by the religious leader to perform this act. Now, there is no safety procedures, cleanliness, hygiene that is kept in mind. And so, safety in the act in itself is a bigger uh problem for me to address, because it's not okay for, because I can say that my friends, even in my circle, I was taken to a gynecologist, whereas my friends were taken to, these women. And the difference in experience and the recalling and the pain and the trauma is vast, right? When I think about it from the ideology and breaking the ideology and the religious perspective, safety, therefore, is the bigger part for me to work on, where I cannot, you know, take away what someone is believing in. I don't agree with it. I will do my best to make sure other people I don't do it, but what I would rather also ensure is that I am helping people get understanding and education around it, as to firstly, why is it that we do this to begin with. I think the fact that you have to go through layers of education and what we call sabak, which is like lessons, like in Boras, is ridiculous, because you can't have a mass community act taking place on secrecy, right? Like that, for me as a human centered design person and a researcher, it makes no sense, because as to why would you do something on a mass level that you can't talk about on a mass level, right? Especially when there's been so much legal work around it. And the second thing is that when you are asking people to do this, and then people are going to then therefore maybe travel from countries where it is illegal, or there has been action in the on the grander country level, not just on the community level. If they're going to travel to countries where it is easier to kind of slide it under the books, the bigger problem is safety then. And because people still believe it's a perfectly valid thing to do, right? For whatever reason it may be. And therefore, making sure that maybe, if anything, you can provide them a safer space. Like in our community, we have hospitals, we have doctors, we have gynecologists that, if you must, maybe could undertake it. And I would go so far as to say that, in 2024, I'm sure we don't have to stick to the 6 and 7-year-old age, because yes, earlier it was told that, yeah, this is a good time for healing to take place and so forth. But in 2024, with reconstruction and so on and all that, why not think about the consenting ability of the child? Right? I mean, if you're
Absolutely.
raising,
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much, Alina. I
yeah,
think that's a lot of important issues that you raised. And firstly, just looking at all the barriers that, an activist has to face even before getting into the issue. And also, I think in the end, you were pointing out about diaspora communities and, coming back home to practice FGM. And I think I'd like to sort of invite Jaria in now. So Jaria Hussein Lala is the UK lead of We Speak Out, and she's been working on the issue of FGM in the UK since 2005 and has trained over 1,000 professionals on dealing with FGM and honor abuse cases. So, Jaria, could you tell us about how advocacy and steps towards addressing FGM in the UK have had an impact on the Bora community globally, and what is the role of the diaspora in engaging with religious leaders and in ending the practice?
Yeah, hi, Divya, and hi, everyone. So first of all, the Borough community in the UK is quite sizable. It has a number of mosques in major cities, but it also has, it's very close-knit at a global level. It's got very strong networks, be it that closed websites, which are only open to their members, or their closed WhatsApp groups. So in the UK, our strong advocacy approach has helped identify survivors worldwide from the Borough community to come forward, to seek support, and to validate their experiences. And it's essentially opened up the conversation. It's created platforms at a community level and also at a family level, which is great in itself. It was a big step from a community which didn't talk about it and now feels they can talk about it. FGM within the Borough community has over the years been now cited in the UK policy documents. So they're recognised as an affected community, which wasn't there before. And that's raised heightened awareness amongst professionals, not only in the UK, but also abroad. So the community is becoming more identifiable. As I said, it's opened up a conversation within households. I can speak from my own personal experience. I've been able to have conversations with Bora members in my social circle in India and the US, and because survivors and communities are told never to talk about it. It's a secret never to be told, even within your own community. It's also influenced survivors to get much needed medical support. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity to meet the world-renowned critical repair surgeon Pierre Fols at his clinic in France, which is a one-stop shop for a wide range of support services for women who were affected by a wide range of violence against women and girls issues. And he told me that over a period of 5 years, he has seen an increase of Bora women from all over the world accessing either medical interventions or therapeutic interventions. So again, it's great that they are getting that support, what they need, and they're breaking that silence. It's also influenced people to rethink about their inherited stance on the practice because of that open conversation. So, what example is this? In my social circle, there was a male. I would describe him as very orthodox in his practice and his belief. and his elder daughter had undergone FGM, Katna, as it's called, but then he changed his mind towards a practice for his younger daughter. So again, that's great progress. Another example is I have a sister-in-law in the US. She has 4 daughters. Like many women of her generation, she's also a survivor of FGM, but she's made the decision to not have any of her 4 daughters cut. So I do want to take credit in my work since 2005 that I've played a key role in stopping 5 girls getting cut. In the UK, our legal framework has had a profound effect. That's whether it be in the child protection arena and also the FGM Act 2003. I know some panel members have spoken about that. The legal route is not always a route, but I do think prosecutions send out a strong message. We've had 4 prosecutions since 2019. Although the borough community haven't been involved in any criminal litigation, I am aware that there have been children subject to FGM protection orders. So in the UK, these are civil orders which can protect girls from undergoing FGM, and they have certain conditions around if there is a flight risk of parents taking children abroad. It can have conditions around not allowing the minor to travel for a period of time, and sometimes that can be until they reach adulthood. In terms of the impact globally, as Masuma said earlier, some of the impact has been that we've had a backlash from those who believe that Kadna is not a form of FGM. So there's been a challenge, I think, with all the core members of We Speak Out at some point, wherever we are. In terms of a significant example of the impact we've had on the global borough community around advocacy was in 2022, working with the Dowdy Borough Welfare Society. We Speak Out organised a campaign engaging notable media outlets such as The Guardian, and we organised a peaceful campaign during the visit of the head priest into the UK. And the reason why we did that, because there was heightened concern that girls would be at a higher level of risk of undergoing FGM due to the priest's public support on the practice back in 2016. So Muharram is the first month of the Islamic month, and the first 10 days there are sermons taking place every day. This was a global gathering, and what we was told, there was about between 8 and 10,000 worshippers visiting the mosque in London. And working with the other NGO, we organised the protest. It was a peaceful protest, and what we know is that worshippers were briefed of our presence, and we saw that as a very positive, because FGM was on that conversation, and they did see us coming out when they were coming out and going in the mosque, and they did see the placards. So we're kind of raising that awareness that, you know, FGM is not acceptable wherever it's taking place. What we do know is change is happening. More people are refuting the practice than there were when we began the journey around 9 years ago. We Speak Out. However, change is taking place silently, as many speakers have said. People can't come out openly due to the consequences it has upon them. Second part of the question, in terms of the role of the diaspora community engaging with religious leaders. Again, as other speakers have said, there is a challenge. Certainly from my perspective, I have engaged with a borough leader in India. That journey has been very, very slow. And sometimes being based abroad, we are in that privileged position because we don't have the filters of other communities who are based abroad. But even then, the journey has been a difficult one. I just feel it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and we're still nowhere near in terms of getting them to have a different position on aborting the practice. However, my experience in the UK has been very different. Whilst I was a chair of the Greater Manchester FGM Forum, I hosted an interfaith gathering of religious leaders where we spoke about the issue, and they committed to a declaration on the zero tolerance of FGM. So they all signed a declaration, and what that meant for them signing them, that they would host a conversation in their religious establishments every 6 months, but they would also have information around FGM. It's a start, and but we've still got a lot to do in terms of that. In the UK, we've had a new government, and the Labour government has pledged to have violence against women and girls in a decade. So I'm hopeful with that manifesto that will provide different opportunities and more opportunities to do more meaningful work with communities, so we can change hearts and minds across all communities, but also within the Bora community as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharia. And I think there's also a lot to be hopeful of there, particularly in terms of the interfaith dialogue. And I think any start in terms of saving girls from being cut is an amazing achievement. So congratulations. I'd like to invite now Leena. Leena Kanwala is a Pakistani origin US attorney, and she works on immigrant rights and in supporting individuals in the US from being deported and detained. And I think she's here to talk more, I think, about her personal experience. And Leena, if you could tell us what your starting point was in terms of understanding the practice of FGMC and why it was important for you to engage in the issue, and what challenges you faced on the way, and also how whether advocacy with the Pakistani community in the US can be used to raise awareness in Pakistan.
Yes, thanks so much, Divya, and hello, everyone. It's good to be here and good to be part of this conversation. Before I share my personal story, I just want to share, contextualize a little bit, provide a little bit of data to contextualize the situation in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, the gender gap is real, right? According to 2024, the 2024 Global Gender Gap Index report from the World Economic Forum, Pakistan ranks 145th out of 146 countries with a score of 0.57, right? This is already a decline from the prior year, where we had a ranking of 142nd, which just sort of indicates that the challenges just generally in Pakistan with respect to gender issues are, remain pretty acute and show no sign of abating or improving. Also at the national level, with respect to kind of any positions, any laws, any national acknowledgement of genital cutting, as far as I'm aware, the last and only time that this happened was in 2006, when the federal government of Pakistan had introduced the National Plan of Action for Children. And in that, it had multiple goals, and goal number 9 of that plan was to end harmful traditions or customary practices such as early and forced marriage and genital cutting by 2010. There's been no other statement or policy since then, and the work that was done at this level was sort of mostly left to provincial governments and has never been taken on since then. So that's sort of like the national picture, right? And then more specifically, the Bora community is sizable in Pakistan. There are about 35,000 Boras estimated to be in Pakistan. They are a pretty vibrant and thriving community, very solidly entrenched in business and economics, and they hold, for a small community, a small minority community, they hold a lot of prestige in the country. So, for example, just this summer, where in celebration of Muharram, which is an important time for Bora Muslims for Shia Muslims to gather. There was the leader of the Bora community visited Pakistan, and he was greeted by the chief minister of the Sindh governor, got a lot of protocol. I was there in Pakistan at the time, and I kind of saw just how much importance the Bora leaders, the Bora leadership is given by the Pakistani government and by the provincial government as well. So all of this to say that any official positions taken by the Bora community are very difficult to challenge at a national level, because the national government is, is pretty closely knit with the Bora leadership. And so I just wanted to provide that context before, talking about my personal story. So I grew up in Pakistan, and I moved to the United States as an adult. Like so many speakers who've shared their stories already, I sort of realized what had happened to me at obviously a pretty early age, but spent most of my childhood, teenage life, early adulthood thinking, dwelling in the shame of it, the feeling of isolation, the feeling that I was alone, that I couldn't really speak about this to anyone, or that even if I wanted to, I had no mechanism to do so, because it would bring, not only shame to me, but shame to my community, could result in them, to my family, could result in them being isolated, ostracized. So all of those like feelings of, layers upon layers of oppression and silence, pretty much prevented me from, made me feel pretty powerless to do anything while I was in Pakistan. But it was only after I came to the United States where, personally for me, I had some distance from the community, and also kind of was able to find a bigger community of advocates, where I finally felt, I guess, safe enough, brave enough, mature enough, old enough, distant enough to take a stance and tell my story. So I think that, the challenge is very real. Once I shared it, it felt extremely cathartic, extremely powerful. I think, as Masuma was mentioning, the journey there is really, really hard. But once you're there, you realize how liberating that is. And personally, I feel like that's what I want to impart to people. Like, if I can persuade 5 people not to subject their daughters to cutting, as a result of my story or my work or my advocacy, that's a huge success. And I think through this sort of slow incremental building of a movement is how we can achieve, some kind of meaningful change. So that's kind of what I wanted to share. And as far as kind of using, leveraging kind of the status that many of us have of, being in the US, being in a Western country, but also trying to influence change within our own countries and within the Bora community as a whole. I think that we can, the sort of the Bora community is very tight knit, and practices through, sort of tend to be, I think, a little more uniform throughout the community, no matter where they are. And that is both a challenge, but also an opportunity, because the practices that I can speak out about here in the US will resonate very closely with people all across the world. And so there is a lot of there's an amplification that can be obtained by each of us who are brave enough to kind of speak out and tell our story and share that journey and create additional safe spaces for more people to speak out. So I think through this incremental change, we can slowly break down those barriers and create like a greater cacophony that will eventually lead to change. I would also say that in the US, in Pakistan, where I visit, frequently, I do notice there are a few things that are changing that I think can help. I think social dynamics between mothers and their families are changing. So, for example, my mother, was resistant to having her daughters cut. For my elder sister, she held out for a year. My sister was not cut until she was 8 years old, because my mother was really afraid to put her daughter through that. But ultimately, the pressure, sustained pressure on her because through her in-laws and through the extended family resulted in her capitulating. But I think that mothers are, the social dynamics are a little bit more different now. And I think more moms who wish to protect their kids can, withstand some of those extended family pressures. I think parenting has also changed, right? Like I was unable to have those conversations with my mother. But my daughters are my daughter's in a very different position, and we've had a lot of open conversations, and this is something I notice is changing in Pakistan too. So there are a lot of informal but powerful ways in which we can leverage these, opportunities to affect change.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lena, for sharing your story and experiences. And I think you're totally right. Like all the incremental change is going to come together and sort of lead to this movement where we're ultimately, hopefully, going to end the practice. I think I would now like to invite Fiza. So Fiza Jha is a writer and communications professional from India, and she's been associated with We Speak Out India. She recently wrote her recent project was a memoir on FGM in India, a memoir of a movement, which chronicles the evolution of survivor-led anti-FGM advocacy. So Fiza, I think we've already heard, I think, from these amazing survivors and activists in terms of their stories and their experiences in building movements in their own context. So based on your research, can you tell us a little bit about how you think storytelling could positively shift mindsets of around the practice of FGMC in the region, and how?
Thanks, Divya, and thank you so much to Equality Now for having me speak here with all these amazing women today. So just from like my research and what I've observed over the last, say, 7 odd years of how the movement has been building up, specifically in the context of India and beyond, there are many ways in which storytelling has come to be very important. So I think first and foremost, I think storytelling has been really instrumental in for survivors to reclaim this idea of from graduating from being victims to being survivors and being proud survivors, and from being survivors to being activists. So in the context of India and within the Bora community specifically, I can speak to storytelling, whether it's been telling one story to one's family, one's friends, one's community members, or being able to say it publicly. While it's a complex process that's filled with lots of risks and pressures, has by and large been really transformative in helping a lot of these women survivors turning their pain into power, and embark on this like long journey of becoming activists. FGM as a practice, as research tells us, has a host of ramifications on one's mental health over the course of their life, ranging from anxiety, depression, PTSD, trust issues, to a host of psychosexual issues. And research also shows us that disclosure or telling one's own story can have a very positive effect on their own self-image or their own mental health. So storytelling has been a really powerful tool on a personal level, I think, for a lot of people working in the cause, or just who have an experience of having undergone the practice. Storytelling has also been a really important way to record or register one's lived experience. Lived experience has emerged as quite a unique, people-centered way of looking at knowledge and even expertise. So it's really kind of brought up a lot of questions of how can we positively frame someone's experience of having undergone FGM, or their lived experience of being a survivor, as a resource that can be leveraged. Whether it's a resource to be leveraged by communities, by policymakers, by researchers, by advocacy groups and interventionists. And then finally, of course, storytelling has been a really important tool for community engagement itself, whether it's like, reaching out just within one's community and trying to raise awareness, trying to build empathy, trying to build solidarity. And then, of course, build empathy and solidarity outside the community, build allies. Stories can be a really powerful way to inspire action, to move people, to even anger people, to stir the pot, so to speak. It's also been a way a lot of people working in the cause have been able to communicate with the press, to been able to take their stories to lawmakers, to lay audiences. Yeah, so stories have generally been a way to make people sit up and pay attention with urgency. We spoke a lot about data today. There's a lot that's been spoken, especially the gaps and the challenges around data. Stories can be a way to supplement some of this limited data. Stories can be a way of humanizing some of this data and adding complexity to this data. FGM is a global practice, but it's a very complex practice. It's practiced very differently in different contexts by different communities. And it's really important to build a nuanced lens when we're talking about it. And storytelling has a capacity to do that, right? And finally, and this is something my own project kind of touched upon. I find that storytelling, and now looking at retrospectively, because it's been some years that a lot of people working on this cause have been working on the issue. Storytelling can also be a really important way of just capturing some of this work as anti-FGM work as a contemporary feminist moment, framing some of this work that activists have done and some of the work, some of what they've been able to achieve as important enough to be added to a larger feminist history. So the project I did earlier this year that was trying to chronicle at least a part of the movement in India among the Bora community was an attempt to do this. So for instance, like the Indian FGM community, which is quite survivor-led, is, it's a complex, intersectional, and constantly evolving movement. It's also remained primarily independent, bottom-up, and bold. So through my project, I was very interested in, how could we frame these efforts as a movement, whether we want to look at it as a socio-cultural, religious effort, as a community-oriented effort, as a feminist movement, as a fight for sexuality and bodily integrity, a humanitarian movement, or a local chapter of a global mandate, because FGM is, of course, a global issue. Or can it be, a case study of what modern activism can look like in the digital age? And I was very interested in how we can, take on these framings through the stories of some of the activists who are working on this issue itself, through their struggles, through their learnings, through their evolution, their arcs in this work over the last few years. So just to share a few examples of what I learned about storytelling itself from some of the women I interviewed and researched for my project. So for instance, Masuma Ranalvi, who spoke earlier, she has, she's really used the device of personal storytelling as a really kind of potent tool in her communication and advocacy work. So she's really kind of, and it's difficult to do that. It's difficult to be able to keep repeating your own personal story and keep reliving your trauma, what happened to you. But she's really been able to kind of leverage her own personal story as a way to reach lots of different audiences and speak to lots of different groups or individuals. Farzana Doctor, who wrote a really, really beautiful and powerful book called Seven, was really able to embed the very tricky question of sex and sexuality, and what is actually the question of sex for survivors in the premise of fiction. So it's been really difficult, and there are very few accounts of survivors being able to really talk about what FGM or what the practice has really done to their sex lives. But by embedding it in fiction, she was able to have a open conversation about that. She was really able to also bring a lot of complexity to our understanding of different stakeholders, whether it's community leaders, whether it's the more orthodox, elders, whether it's younger folks, whether it's more people on the spectrum of anti-FGM efforts, but really like have a really nuanced and kind of balanced understanding of all these different stakeholders within an ecosystem or community that practice FGM. And finally, she was able to reach like many new audiences through her book, like beyond development sector circles, or beyond circles that would be interested in humanitarian effort. She was able to just reach lovers of fiction through that tool, or through that novel that she created. And then finally, Arifa Johari, who has then, through Saiyo and the work that they do, they've done all sorts of things, from create an AI driven app that enables people to have difficult conversations, to a lot of YouTube and poster campaigns, to finally like physical stories shared, passed on in community events, such as their Thal Pe Charcha series, which is like a community series they did around food. So yeah, I've learned a lot from these women, and I hope we can continue thinking of new and novel ways to take our stories forward to advance this work.
We just have maybe 5 minutes to wrap up, so I want to take a couple of the questions. Masuma, maybe we can come to you on the data one, and then Jaria, and then I think there's a couple more questions in the chat.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, of course, the biggest issue right now staring us in the face is the lack of data. And because of the lack of data, essentially, we face there is no credibility given to us and our work. For instance, when we were in the Supreme Court, the public prosecutor issues a statement that there is no estimate of FGM in India, or there's no NCRB data in India, and hence the practice does not exist. So data is essential to drive any point that we're essentially trying to make. Government data is one, but you have international agencies. Today, there's a huge global effort. There is a huge amount of global funding on this issue. UNFPA as an organization is committed to this whole issue of FGM, and there is a sustainable development goal that by 2030 we want to see a world which is free of FGM. Now, so there's a lot which is driving this global international movement. All it needs is for international agencies to fund larger studies. Now, what we've done, the anecdotal evidence that we have, those are small studies, like the We Speak Out study, which we just now showed you. We had 93 respondents, but that was also a huge effort. We had to go across 4 states, large territories in India, meet a lot of people finally to get 93 respondents and have these detailed conversations with them. But so it is possible to do collection of data. It is possible to collect quantitative data, and if the government is willing to do it, I mean, it's going to be fantastic. Forget doing census and stuff like that, but 4 states, we're talking about 4 states in India where there's a large concentration of the Bora community, and 1 state where we are saying the Sunni Muslim community, there is a prevalence, which is Kerala. So typically 5 states in India, there can be efforts by the Women and Child Development Ministries of these states to undertake data of, just doing a survey of whether or not the practice exists. Of course, there will be data which will be hidden, but that's fine. You're starting the process, you're giving it recognition, you're accepting the fact that there is something like this, and you're commissioning and spending money on collecting more data. So I think that's it. The first is the idea to accept that there is a certain critical amount of evidence that we have that this exists. So now we are willing to invest in more to do a larger study. So we are stuck at the first step itself, but there's no recognition of the fact that something like this exists. So yeah.
Thanks, Masuma. Jaria, do you want to come to the question on the protection order?
Yeah, sure. So the short answer is we don't have exact data in terms of how many child protection plans for our children have been subjected to due to FGM, because that's not how the data is collected. How I know that information is over the years, due to the work I've been doing specifically with the Bora community, I've been asked to provide support to some social work teams when those processes have been taking place. So we don't have the exact numbers in terms of on a national level.
Thank you. So there's also another question from Huda in terms of how we balance care and compassion while advocating against the practice and also curb it without pushing it underground. So I don't know if there's anyone who wants to share a quick thought on that.
I just want to point in the direction of the film. The film was one attempt to do exactly that, where we are addressing the dilemma which a young couple is facing, and we are addressing their fears, we are addressing their, and absolutely genuine questions about, even if we feel like that our elders are not, allowing us, or are they liars, then who do we believe in this kind of a scenario? So nuanced ways in which you communicate uh, in sensitively with people, and some of the things which Fiza said about using stories. You cannot undo a story which has been said. It's evidence. It's personal evidence, and you cannot say that this does not exist. There's no way to second guess a personal story. So it's there, it's in your face, and you have to accept it. And I think more sharing of these personal stories, I mean, Lena also spoke about hers, and how it can make that incremental difference, to sensitively do this.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think that's just the power of storytelling, like working towards incremental change, the need for data, and all of this has really come out today. And it shows us, I think we also need to work together more as a South Asian community to address the issue together. But I just want to thank all the panelists for your time today and everyone who attended. I think this was just a really enlightening discussion, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation going forward. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.